Hey all, Avros here, back with the next Lufenia Plus fight. This one is for Yda's LD release against the Swarmfly and its two minions, the small Swarmflies. This fight has a fairly tight turn count and the bosses are kind of annoying in this one. So the orb first. Back to lethal attacks again from the orb, and this one is kind of a pain to deal with, as it appears at battle start, has a 10 count, and the increased triggers are bravery or HP poison effects, with both increasing the orb count by 6. This typically means you need the bosses to take a turn to actually increase the orb, so you need to be prepared for that if you're going to go with a strategy like that. As I'll detail a bit later on, there is a strategy that lets you get around having the bosses have any turn, so we'll come to that when we get there. Other attacks these bosses have, mostly you want to watch out for Mosbite, a bravery attack that batteries the boss and its minions, as well as heals the main fly's HP. Buzz and Buzz Plus, both of which the small swarm flies will do, and this raises their stats, heals the main fly's HP, as well as grants the small flies bravery plus HP, and gives the boss a regen buff that restores its HP and bravery, and the plus version is a more potent one. And finally, if the small Swarmflies are dead, the big one will use Rallying Cry, and will revive both of these small Swarmflies, raise their stats, and reduce bravery damage and gains for the remainder of the fight. So my strategy for this fight was to take full advantage of one of the incredibly potent units for this fight, and the strategy I was mentioning before, and without him, you really wouldn't be able to do this encounter the way that I've actually handled it here, and it would be much harder. So we're bringing back my favorite tree-based Warlock, Xdeath. So for this fight, you're really wanting to utilize how strong an off-turn HP damage poison effect can be, and by that I'm actually referring to Xdeath's BT aura, as it does count as a poison for this fight, meaning it will actually increase the orb, even though it is really just off-turn damage. So this effect can essentially take full care of the orb on its own, as it does do, as I said, poison damage, as well as having Xdeath in will allow you to bring additional poison effects such as Armagest and Maelstrom that Xdeath can put up on those bosses there, and that will take care of the orb completely if the boss does get any turns. And for this fight, it means he is one of the best units, and so even better is to bring a friend Xdeath if you can, and bring along some turn hoggers or some characters that can manipulate turn order to maximize the number of turns the BT effect is up for from Xdeath, as it's only active for 3 turns whether it be a friend unit or not, and as well as proccing the effect as many times as possible with those turn hoggers and turn manipulators. That'll keep the orb as high as possible. You get the HP damage from the BT poison, and that will get the boss down as low as you can before having to deal with any, sort of cleansing off of the HP buffs he's got, or dealing with the HP regenerative effects that the boss has in this fight. So this meant bringing Cid and Aphmau. This sounds familiar if you've watched any of my videos I've done recently, but without the huge buffs that Bartz brings and the usual battery that he provides, this fight is actually a bit more complicated, but using Xdeath's poison from his BT aura does make up for that fact somewhat. So for the early part of this fight, I was using Cid's LD to get Bartz's up in the turn order, get his turns up early, and then used his BT phase to start working on having his mastery and auras stacked when he comes back into the fight later, as he's the unit I will be replacing with Xdeath. The usual non-mastery before BT setup phase here, focusing all the attacks on the main fly to get prepped for that sort of phase 2 of this fight. So phase 2 starts with getting some debuffs and the bravery poison from Faris's LD call, which I had on Aphmau, up onto the bosses, and then I used Shield Subverter on her to get some of her own buffs up on the party. And then with Bartz, I used his AA Cait's LD call and then Double Hand Plus to stack the aura up and make sure he didn't, sort of accelerate himself with those high turn rates that he's got on Missile and his LD. And then used Runga Storm on Cid to allow the bosses to get a couple of turns there, get the orb stacked up. Using this did kind of push the boss back a bit, gave Aphmau another turn, so I just used 6 of them on her to get all of her buffs up and not sort of take any immediate turns like she does with some of her other abilities. And then once the orb had some more stacks added, I used Aphmau's HP attack to keep, again, her from getting a turn too quickly, and then used Cavalry Rush on Cid to bring Bartz up in the turn order and sort down immediately for Xdeath. And once Xdeath is in, I used his BT attack immediately to get the BT aura HP poison effect up, and then get all that follow-up sort of damage there working. And then we're straight into our usual, how do we want to maximize this question? And obviously, the usual Sidmau shenanigans, of course, so using that usual rotation there with Sidmau. Just, using the launch of Cid, using Aphmau to give him additional turns, launching again, bringing Aphmau up in the turn order, etc. I've gone over it a few times before. It's down in the description below if you want the full step-by-step description for it. I'm not going to talk through it here. It's been done so many times now. I've done it so many times in my previous videos. most people are sort of aware of how this works at this point. During this whole process though, I did start to get to the point where I was trying to conserve some uses of Aphmau's LD, and I also wanted to use Seraphic Ray on Cid to get rid of the HP regen buff the boss did end up getting, and then utilize some of the excess turns there on the track with how much I'd push them back from the continued launches and everything to get a few turns for X-Death up. In those turns I got up Grand Cross and Maelstrom, and then on his last turn before the sort of BT Aura faded away there, because you only got those 3 turns, of course, I used Almagest, so I got all of X-Death's debuffs up on the boss just in case I needed them. And then once Aphmau's LD sort of started to run out, and I was starting to get to that point where I'm like, okay, the boss's health is getting low enough I can sort of handle this. I started to progress with, you know, not using the Sid-Mao combo, not getting as much of that sort of immediate turns again. And once the BT Aura ran out at 36% HP remaining, that was the point where I was like, okay, yep, I'll keep one use of Aphmau's LD for using it under the summon, and I need to get X-Death on the field as fast as I can, because the orb is now no longer fully under my control from that. Once I had Bartz come back in to replace X-Death, which was at around 32% HP remaining on the boss, I just went ahead and used Double Hand on Bartz because his turn came up first, of course. Wanted to keep as much of his boss up as possible, give that Cait Sith LD call up. I made sure that, you know, Aphmau got an attack next, or, you know, Cid could have had an attack next, it wouldn't have mattered, but the bosses had their own turn coming up on the turn track, so I let them use it, because with Rallying Cry there, with all of the debuffs I'd gotten from X-Death and from Faris's LD call, I had a full stack of all of the up as framed debuffs on the boss. There was no chance it would actually get any healing there, so I could tick the orb up just a bit just to play it safe in case I needed to deal with the orb in the last few turns, as any turns I was taking outside of BT phase or summon now would cause that orb to tick down without X-Death on the field. And now that the orb had gone back up, I had Cid's turn come up, I used Pandemonium summon, went for the last sort of the Sid-Mao train turns there with Aphmau's last LD under summon, and between Cid and Aphmau, we got the boss down to about 7% HP left before summon ran out. Then I used Cid's final LD because he had 2 going into summon just outside of the summon, and with the amount of damage from that, got the boss down to 3% HP left. I was being a bit paranoid about that orb. I probably could have just avoided the turns altogether and not had the Rallying Cry go off, but you don't actually need the small Swarmflies to be dead to actually finish this fight, so that was no real problem. And then once the launch from Cid had gone off and gotten it down to that 3% HP, Aphmau's EX, another cavalry rush from Cid knocked it down to 1%, and then basically it was in finisher range for Bartz. I used his BT plus finisher. That was it, the fight was over. No big issues there. This came in at 31 turns, which is well under the turn count there being 65, so that ended up working out perfectly fine. And with all that said, that's it for this fight. So on that note, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or would like any further assistance with this fight, please ask in the comments down below. Always happy to discuss alternative strategies to what I've used. I'm obviously focusing very heavily on using Bartz, doing a Bartz saga, so that's kind of what I'm doing here. There is a lot of other options to this fight, so happy to discuss any of those if you're curious. And thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of the video.
さあ行こう。すべての力を持って呪縛を断つ。舞うだって。 返そう。そこだ。
まだまだやっちゃえ。縁も竹縄だな。面白くなってきたぞ。あーしまい。
さあ行こう。不物では終わらない。
なうだって。
返そう。そこだ。
頼りにしてるから任せておけんな。
魂よ力となれ。
なうだって。
返そう。そこだ。
頼りにしてるから任せておけんな。
光よ切り開いてみせよう。
なうだって。
返そう。そこだ。
それ以上近寄らないで。
さあ行こう。不物では終わらない。
なうだって。
返そう。そこだ。
頼りにしてるから任せておけんな。協力してね。とっておきだ。これ痛いんだから。
魂よ力となれ。返そう。
なうだって。
そこだ。飛べ。
こういうのはどう？
さあ行こう。不物では終わらない。返そう。
なうだって。
そこだ。
助かった。
せい。
そりゃ
さあ行こう。すべての力を持って呪縛を断つ。
なうだって。助け合いだ。
そこだ。 では終わらない。
舞うだって
助け合いだ。
そこだ。
頼りにしてるから任せておけな。
魂よ力となれ。
舞うだって
助け合いだ。
そこだ。
頼りにしてるから任せておけな。
さあ行こう。すべての力を持って呪縛を断つ。
舞うだって
助け合いだ。
それ以上近寄らないで。
さあ行こう。不屈では終わらない。
舞うだって
助け合いだ。
これ痛いんだから出直してまいれ。
冒険はまだ終わらない。やろうぜ。ごめんな。この勝負もらった。いい勝負だった。